Honestly, I think the worst part of Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is the fact that Peter never once called Miles the N-word while wearing the black suit. And now that I've gotten your full attention, let me explain for the next minute or two why I'm the best guy to rewrite this game's story mode. I've been a Spider-Man fan since the day I could hold a pencil. I've watched all of his movies, read most of his comics, and also wrote a fan comic about him. He is easily my favorite hero, whose first game is in my top 5 favorite games of all time. So imagine my disappointment when I watched a playthrough of the sequel 2 years ago. And it's really unfortunate because this game could have easily been better than the first one, as the setup was nearly perfect. It had a great cast of characters, even better villains than the first game, and a premise that would make anyone who played the first game completely awestruck. So what went wrong? How did Insomniac fumble the story of Spider-Man 2 when they were the same ones who made the first game? Was it the inclusion of certain ideas and themes that most people would consider woke? Or was it the bloated cast of characters not meshing well with the rushed inclusion of certain villains? If you ask me, I think it was more of the latter than the former, and when you look at the story, you can see why. In layman's terms, Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is a lot similar to No Way Home in a way, where it has a lot of characters, villains, and themes to cover, but runs in the same time frame as its predecessor, so everything that it covers makes it feel a lot more bloated as a result due to poor pacing. But in this case, it can't utilize the nostalgia of Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man appearing, so you're just going to have to deal with those 5 MJ stealth missions without the hope of getting something you'd actually want. And yes, I did say 5, because this idiot saw the justified constructive criticism the first game had and chose to double down on it. I mean, it's not like I wanted to be Spider-Man all the time in a Spider-Man game, but I digress since we're getting off topic here. The story follows Peter Parker and Miles Morales as they both fight for screen time while trying to be nice to each other. Harry becomes more of a plot device character than someone I would actually care about if I knew them in real life, and MJ has now gone from a bitchy yet lovable gal with a decently nice face to one of the head writers who is suddenly a strong heroic character in the same game that has almost no cops, with the side characters being either a hit or miss, and I'll let you decide which one of those is the majority. The actual plot itself feels like the recent Superman movie in the sense that it's structured like a comic book, but in the worst way possible, as the story contains massive pacing issues, either hurting the integrity of major characters in it or completely fucking up the reintroduction of others. And if I sound like an absolute jerk that's just taking the piss and mocking this game at every point I can, then congratulations for finally reading the title of this section in the video. But in all seriousness, I say all this to make it apparent just how disappointing this game's story actually is, especially when you compare it to the original. It's exactly like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3 coming out after Spider-Man 2. It's literally history repeating itself, but it doesn't all have to be doom and gloom. I did say I would single-handedly fix this game's story in the title, so let's get into that, brought to you with an epic transition.
Spider-Man, you can call me Webhead, you can call me Amazing, just don't call me late for dinner, you get it?
Since I'm rewriting this story, I think it's best to operate on some ground rules, mostly because I want to show how this story could have been great without straying too far from its original idea, which leads me to rule number 1. I can only cut out 3 different things out of the story. This can include characters, plot points, or both. And by the way, those images on screen right now are what I'm cutting from the story. I think Venom is a good representation of how bloated and rushed this story actually is, as these things have to happen in order just for Venom to exist. I like the idea that in Spider-Man Miles Morales, the fate of Harlem was at stake and not the entirety of New York City. It made the plot feel a lot more personal and grounded, and I want to repeat that for the second game. After all, it is what made Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 so good. Also, Harry is just not a good fit for Venom. Alright, on to rule number 2. The rewrite has to follow the same motions as the original, but can deviate in its execution. The third and final rule is that it has to actually be good, because what's the point in rewriting the story if it's just going to end up like this? And since that was everything I needed to mention, it's time for me to further waste your time by mentioning the sponsor of today's video, my fan comic of this guy. I'm currently working on a webcomic of a Spider-Man OC I created when I talked to a Captain Marvel AI chatbot, and believe it or not, me and the AI were in the freaking kitchen. Like seriously, we were cooking a story that was better than probably 90% of Spider-Man comics nowadays. And even though I know that's not a high bar to achieve, I still think it's impressive nonetheless. And before you say it, yes, this image was traced using a Sam Raimi pose. It's kinda difficult for me to draw Spider-Man, so don't at me. Anyways, the comic will be up on my DeviantArt sometime sometime after this video comes out. I'll link it in both the description as well as my community tab. Oh, and also my Twitter. And now that the ad's over, it's time to get into my rewrite for Marvel's Spider-Man 2. I'd like to start off this rewrite by making Peter more of the focus than Miles, since this is Peter's game after all. Now obviously Miles will get a sufficient amount of screen time and a good story arc, but I think Peter should be more of the center focus than Miles. The opening prologue will be much more horrific and sinister, having it be a nightmare retelling how he got incubated, but have the nightmare itself end with him getting trapped in a cocoon by the symbiote as it envelops the room. And then Harry can wake up in the present while stuck in the incubator, as he realizes he's surrounded by wires and the symbiote's tendrils. I think making the opening much more sinister and terrifying would help set up just how much of a villain the symbiote can be, and why Harry would want to get rid of it later on. I think letting Peter keep his teaching job for the majority of the story would actually be the best thing I could do for him, as it would give us some classic Spidey double life storytelling from that one mission we got last game. This could be done by having Peter send Miles to fight Sandman alone while he evacuates the school, getting him in the good graces of the principal, which will eventually dissipate by the later half of the story when he quits due to his symbiote's influence. Miles as a character in this game really only has two struggles: writing that essay and quenching his bloodlust by killing Martin Lee. And while that second one is pretty good and gives one of the best scenes in the game, that first one can be easily solved with ChatGPT. So I think making him struggle with his double life as Spider-Man and a student with friends and a girlfriend would definitely help, since it would create an interesting dichotomy between Peter and Miles on how they deal with the struggle of being Spider-Man. Of course, if that sounds too generic and repetitive for you, then I think blurring the line between Miles and Spider-Man would do, since the main reason Miles struggles to write his essay is because Spider-Man is who he sees himself as. He doesn't separate Spider-Man and Miles Morales like Peter Parker has done in both this iteration and in others. So I think making him struggle with his dual identity throughout the story and having both his friends and his girlfriend express this would definitely help his character. Of course, if that doesn't work, then Kraven's plan in the original story is kinda good for his character, but it sucks. So allow me to come up with a better plan for him, that way it'll actually be good. Okay, let me just get to the point here. I think Kraven's plan should be going after the villains to get to Spider-Man, failing on purpose each time until Spider-Man, or the 2's Spider-Man, eventually team up with one of the villains, after which he will have his henchmen and lackeys go after the Spider-Man and his villains, opting to kill the villains and capture one of the spiders, eventually tiring out the one that isn't captured, giving Kraven a good chance to kill both of them. I think this plan suits Kraven better, since it is something a hunter would come up with, and would still uphold his motivation of wanting at least one of the spiders to kill him during combat. Of course, since this plan would include killing the villains from the last game, that means 75% of the main story is going to be you as Spider-Man saving your villains from a bigger threat, a plotline that was undoubtedly the best part of No Way Home. Now we could just roll the dice on which villain survives, but I think it's best that we kill off our characters with good reason, instead of no reason at all, the Vulture being the first to go. Since he is canonically the first supervillain Spider-Man ever had, I think it's best to kill him off, as his death would be all the more tragic with the long history he and Peter have. Connors should also get killed off, considering he is just a scientist with a family, and isn't actually evil. It will make his death all the more tragic for the story, as it instills hatred and frustration in Peter for not being a good enough Spider-Man to save him. Hatred and frustration that can be used for a certain character, but we'll get to that later, as not every villain is going to die, and in fact, quite a few of them are gonna get reformed. Martin Lee is the first obvious choice, so let's just skip to him and go to Rhino, who is freed from his suit after Peter and Miles build a contraption that Otto had made in the last game. I want to hammer home the idea that times can change and villains do reform, Tombstone being the biggest example, and having both Peter and Miles come together to help reform a villain who isn't actually evil would be the best way to do it, because Spider-Man isn't just a superhero that refuses to look the other way, but is also a superhero who helps save anyone, including his villains, and in some cases, saving someone can mean reforming them, which is also why Sandman is getting reformed too. Of course, Shocker would also be a villain that is reformed, considering he's more or less just a hired gun, so having either of the Spider-Men show him that there's more to his life than just petty crime would be really good for his character. I think the only two villains that won't be reformed are Scorpion and Electro, which would be very fitting since they are a part of Miles' rogues gallery in the comics, and Miles will still take over being the main Spider-Man at the end of the story, because unlike some people, I actually don't mind the idea of Peter taking a small vacation from being Spider-Man in between games, as the third game will just give a good enough reason for Pete to come back. I mentioned earlier how killing off Kirk Connors will be great for Symbiote Spider-Man by fueling his hatred and frustration, and it's time I elaborate on how other plot points would do the same. Letting Peter keep his teaching teaching job for the majority of the story would definitely add to its stress and frustration. Of course, having Peter wear this alien while dealing with Kraven would definitely help, but I don't think Kraven should be killed off. I think it's better if Symbiote Spider-Man brutalizes Kraven, the two ending up in the city due to their battle, and Miles ends up stopping him, leading to a fight between the two where Peter realizes what the symbiote does to him and takes it off. As for how he gets it, I think having the same scenario in the original story wouldn't hurt since it isn't actually that bad, and falls in line with what the characters would actually do. Now I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for this section of the video, so let me preface it with this statement. Mary Jane becoming Venom was a controversial thing because it was written and executed poorly. A good writer can write almost any scenario and still have it be good, and Mary Jane becoming Venom is one of them, especially since the setup for MJ becoming Venom was right there and Insomniac just didn't take it. Venom as a character, at least in his early stages, is meant to represent the pain, torment, and suffering Spider-Man leaves behind, a personification of Peter's mistakes and failures, and an amalgamation of the hatred and frustration that both the current user and Peter had, as the symbiote is a metaphorical sponge, latching onto the negative characteristics and memories of an individual and amplifying them, using bad personality traits as a catalyst. And now that I think about it, who else in the story ends up being at odds with Peter due to how much he is being Spider-Man? MJ is the perfect choice for Venom because she as a character feels all the consequences of being in a relationship with Peter Parker when he chooses Spider-Man over her. She can be the perfect representation of what Venom means to Spider-Man and can also help further develop the relationship between the two, as in the beginning of the game, things were going steady, but took a pitfall when Peter chose to help his villains, neglecting time with her and his own job to be Spider-Man for everyone else, quitting his job and fucking up their situation with Aunt May's home, causing more stress to MJ, with Peter getting the symbiote only making things worse, all of it coming to a standstill when she sees him brutalizing Kraven, deciding to arrive onto the scene as a way to finally get through to Peter, but she ends up bonding with the symbiote when she arrives, feeling a wave of negative emotions and memories flooding her mind. MJ will brutally beat up Miles, leaving Peter to be the only one that can stop her, with the boss battle being at Aunt May's old home. Peter and MJ will fight, with Peter trying to talk some sense into MJ as she brings up every bad thing about her life, and every bad memory she's had with him, citing Spider-Man as a reason for it. Obviously, this is the symbiote talking more than anything else, similar to the symbiote in Spectacular Spider-Man, amplifying all of MJ's worst feelings and memories to manipulate her into killing Spider-Man. Peter is able to get through to her, and in a similar fashion to the show I just mentioned, MJ uses her willpower to rid her body of the symbiote as Peter burns it. Burning the symbiote doesn't come without consequence, however, as now that Harry lacks the very thing he needs to stay alive, he unfortunately dies at the end of the story. And in a similar fashion to Aunt May's death in Marvel's Spider-Man 1, Norman watches his bedridden son die, as his body was getting weaker the moment he gave the symbiote to Peter while he was Spider-Man. In a fit of grief and rage at Harry's funeral, Norman blames Spider-Man and promises that he'll stop at nothing to make him pay, because if Peter hadn't destroyed the symbiote after he stopped MJ, then Harry would have lived. Now, Peter and Mary Jane must deal with the guilt of being the reason their friend died, while Norman gets the proper setup to become Green Goblin. Oh, and Miles finally gets his essay done. As for the side missions, I don't really find anything wrong with them, and honestly, the only thing I'd change is make Peter take Miles' place in the Black Cat story. You know, just to give it a much better conclusion since these two characters have more history. If you were to call me one of those people that were disappointed by the lack of a DLC for this game, you would be right. And if you were to also say that I don't like the way they introduced Cindy Moon, then you would be right about that too. I think the best way to introduce Cindy Moon is to have the two Spider-Man swing off into the sunset and let us see Cindy watching them from a distance. This can help set up her character for the DLC while still keeping her somewhat comic accurate, as she was always watching Spider-Man in the comics. As for her DLC, I think the story would be better if it was a prequel to her appearance in Spider-Man 2. The main campaign will follow Cindy Moon as she breaks out of the government facility currently keeping her. My thought process here is that she'll basically have the exact same origin as she did in the comics, with the only change being the fact that Peter Parker isn't here. Of course, the story will follow Cindy as she lives her daily life within the facility, not being allowed to go outside as the government workers constantly run tests on her abilities, with a good portion of the game being flashbacks of her time before she got bitten, allowing us to see the dichotomy of her old teenage life and her current life in the government facility. Cindy will then decide to break out, with the reason being that she misses her family so much after all these years of being kept as a lab rat. The end of the story will be Cindy breaking out and going to her childhood home, only to realize that her family moved on without her. She finds a couple getting jumped and decides to step in after having a flashback of her father telling her about helping the little guy, basically giving a pseudo Uncle Ben speech. Cindy stops the muggers and leaves the couple as they question who she is. As she swings to the rooftop of the nearest building, seeing the two Spider-Men swing in the distance, she tells herself that she'll be seeing Peter Parker real soon. Overall, I think I did a rather good job with this rewrite. I took out a lot of the problems with the original story and replaced them with some really good changes that I think should have been there from the beginning. And now that I finished this video, I'm gonna go play Marvel's Spider-Man 2 for the first time. Better late than never, I suppose. But first, Come on, almost there. Finally, my plan is now complete. Okay, now it's time for me to play the game. Good thing I brought my lotion.